Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and anybody else that I happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, a casual observer, or someone just floating through this channel, I hope you find it interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com, and I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes and make them available for you whenever you want to download them. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or Twitter with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, contact information, and more. Today is Sunday, October the 16th, and we're going to be talking with Eric John Janssen, and we're actually going to be talking about Whiskey Acres, which is a farm distillery. And you actually introduced me to it, but if you have been around whiskey, you obviously know who Eric is. Like everybody in the world knows who Eric is, and he's world popular here. It's a household name in the whiskey community. But I'll give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself, how we got to this conversation, then we'll roll from there and see what happens.
Are you sure you're not running for political office? You know how to blow smoke just the right way. Let me tell you.
I've been around the political ecosphere from time to time. Give me just a second because I want to check our live stream and make sure it's running appropriately because YouTube told me it wasn't.
Uh-oh.
Oh, we're good.
Oh, all right. So long as we're good. So yeah, I'm Eric Janssen. You might find me on Instagram as the Bourbon Cowboy. Cowboy hat's just kind of something I came up with. Yada yada. Come from Illinois, from a smaller family farm. My brother runs it currently. He is the fourth generation that is running it. Whiskey Acres is also a family farm distillery in DeKalb, Illinois. I'm just a massive fan of theirs. I am not a brand rep by any measure, so if somebody happens to hear something that might be contradictory, please, by all means, tell us. I do not know everything. I do not claim to know everything. I'm just a big fan of bourbon, big fan of Whiskey Acres, and big fan of John.
So if someone from the brand does show up and they're like, "Hey, we really like this guy. We should hire him," they can find you on Instagram, right? Like, because that's what's really going to happen here. It's not that like we take objection to what he's saying, because at this point, it's just two friends having a conversation about whiskey, which is exactly what whiskey is about, right? A couple people just
Absolutely.
drinking and chatting. But
Absolutely. And repping my other friend, got to learn how to use
yep.
Whiskey Mutant.
you make sure the branding is right, and this is the problem with having like one of these boom microphones is I can put the branding on, but sometimes it covers up, and you got to get it just right so the thing, the logo hangs out or whatever. But you know what? Maybe I'll have one of my children go dig up my Whiskey Mutant shirt, and we can match each other, be twinsies here. So
He'll get a kick out of that.
you have a small family farm. What did you guys? Were you row crop? Were you dairy?
Yep.
Like what did you do?
Always row crop as long as I've been alive. And as far back as I can have any record that I know of. My brother may have, through his own investigation, found out more, but that all takes a split back in 2015 when Dad passed, and we're not going to ponder on that right now. But
Right.
yeah, so he may have more information that I don't. But yeah, we've been row crop, just rotating corn and soybeans, never doing any cover crops to my knowledge, except for 1 year and a flood year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we'll have to catch ourselves doing this from time to time, but row crop specifically refers to things like corn and wheat and soybeans that are planted in a row. That's kind of the straightforward term of it. I say this in my work all the time, and you grew up in it, but if you find a non-farming person, they're like, what the hell's a row crop? And it's literally just that, things that are in a row. But if you think about specialties, or if you're into livestock, which are all farms as well, you're likely not farming grain or farming anything that sits in a row, or maybe you are, but you're only doing it, to feed on the farm. You grow enough corn to offset some of your feed costs or whatever else. But
Yep.
It's a different operation whenever you're farming for profit as opposed to farming to feed.
Absolutely.
So let's go back a little bit in time and think about Eric as a whiskey person, because you grew up in Illinois, right? It was Illinois.
Yep. Yes, sir.
So Illinois, a lot of corn, but not necessarily at this point known significantly for whiskey, which is confusing because, it's where all the corn comes from in the world.
It
How did you
is.
get here? How did you get into bourbon?
Yeah. So, truthfully, I would say like the idea of drinking like whiskey and cokes, all that. A lot of that probably came from like pop culture as I was growing up.
Mhm.
You had shows like Mad Men and Suits and other stuff like that that would glamorize drinking whiskey, and so that's something I kind of saw at a young age, and I was like, oh, that's like what the badass drinks, or what the cool guy drinks. Well, me having an internet connection was like the worst thing ever as a child because I would just go down every rabbit hole researching things. It started with beer, it went to whiskey. Um, I got into archery, I got into golf. Anything that I've gotten into, I have spent a multitude of hours online researching before I even stepped my foot in the door. And so, yeah, I started out, turned 21 in 2015. So I haven't been in for that long. And I know you're laughing over there because you're
I
like,
was no
you are
listen. I
so
was
young.
already laughing because you were like, whenever I was growing up and I was watching Mad Men, right? And that was what I was married. I was like 27 when that came out. Thank you for hitting. We are now 7 minutes in, and you've already hit the old chord. Congratulations, you nailed it
Let me just
super
drive
early.
it home for you.
And then you follow subtly right in with that. In 2015, I turned 21. Damn it, damn it, man.
Somebody's gonna have to do a wellness check on you after this.
This is not unusual. You have to understand. You're slightly older than the people that I work with on a daily basis. Some of my direct reports, so I get this feeling on the regular. They're like, "Oh yeah, in the 1900s," and they're talking about the late 90s, but that still technically is true
But
because
no, it's not.
we're 22 years into the 2000. So you can say in the late 1900s and mean the 90s.
Oh, let's never refer to it like that though, please, because now you're getting at my old cord.
But that's just it. You were only there for a few years in the 90s, man. That's like my first 20 years were the 90s.
Hey, I was there for the majority of the 90s. I was born at the very beginning of 94. So I
Okay.
had 6 years. That's the majority.
That's fair. That's fair. You can have it. All right. Sorry, I derailed that completely. So you got in.
That's okay. That's going to
You're the
be
kind
this
of person
whole
that dives in.
conversation.
Yeah, you're the kind of person that dives in deep on something, and I can appreciate that because prior to COVID, like I've always been, not always, but for a long time, I've been a whiskey fan, but maybe had 25 or 30 bottles prior to COVID, and then we all locked down, and I didn't spend money on lunch or gas or anything for 2 years, and so
Yeah.
you just do things like this, and there's like a
Well,
whole other non-visible shelf that used to
here,
be behind me.
you end up
Yeah,
with that.
yeah,
And
and you start
don't even
figuring out like
talk about all the stuff that is sitting on my desk.
and the things that you have to put the spreadsheet together to make sure you accidentally don't buy duplicates, unintentionally buy duplicates. You might want to, but sometimes like I should buy this, but like, oh shit, I already bought this like 3 weeks ago and I forgot about it. But
I
these are just
gave up on
problems.
trying to have a spreadsheet because uh, I like my organized chaos.
Yeah, well, it literally happened at 3 back-to-back trips. I bought something that I had bought a couple of months before, and I don't necessarily I generally don't buy duplicates because you've gotten this question. What's your favorite whiskey? And my answer is always I haven't tried them all yet, so I don't know. Right.
Yep.
And that's where I'm at. Like I want to try everything I can. And I know it's impossible to try all of them because there's 2,000 craft distilleries in the United States, not mentioning the big boys and their varied brands. It's just not going to happen. But if I spend money on the same thing over and over again, I'm not going to get to broaden anymore. Right. So
No.
just don't finish a bottle and buy another one. But then whenever I buy the same thing and now I've got like storage problems, I'm like, oh, shit. And so I created a spreadsheet and then I save it on Dropbox so that way I can access it while I'm in the liquor store. It's alphabetical. I'm like, all right, oh, there it is. I got it. I don't need to buy this one.
I think I'd like it once I had it, it's the issue of actually going through and doing the inventory the first time.
Yes. And I happened to correspond to a time whenever I was moving all of my whiskey from one location to the other, and I was like, okay, I have to touch all of them as it is. Let's go ahead and set it up now. And I was putting everything in a laundry basket because I was bringing it upstairs to move it into the office. And on my 5th trip, I realized that's when I needed for sure to do it, because I was 5 laundry baskets in of bringing just totes of whiskey in. But these are all first world problems. I appreciate the deep dive into things, because I do this, and I got into blacksmithing at one point in time and made a forge, and hammered things out and whatever else.
All right.
You go in, you go all in. You mentioned archery. Do you still do archery, or is that just something you did for a while and you shifted to a new thing?
So, not to toot my own horn, I just got a notification from Facebook, uh, like 3 days ago, 9 years ago plus 3 days, whatever. I actually won collegiate national championship in archery.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I used to travel all over the U.S. and compete. Um, I still have all my equipment. I still have a considerable amount of skill, but uh, I was in my early 20s with zero responsibilities in life. And so eventually I had to shift gears and focus on actually putting together a real life. But I got to step away on my own terms, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
And another really cool thing I got to do is I actually got to design a product for a company before I left, which made me feel really good because that
So
means I got to leave my
is this
mark.
like a is this one of the major archery manufacturers, or is this like a
Smaller startup company.
okay?
Um, the person happened to win the big Vegas money shoot, the $50,000 shoot,
Mm-hmm.
and I happened to be great friends with him. He asked me to help design a release. I did so for one of my courseworks in college, and it became a full-fledged product.
So what did you go to college for? You're a farm kid who's into beer slash whiskey slash archery slash anything else. What makes the most sense for Eric Janssen to go to college for?
CAD design and engineering.
So what directed you? So you grew up on a farm and you decided you wanted to be a CAD designer. How do you get there? How's that happen?
So part of that comes from my time in the FFA. Growing up in Illinois and growing up about an hour and a half south of Chicago, we had one really cool thing, and that is CNH, Case New Holland,
Mm-hmm.
has a massive headquarters in Burr Ridge, Illinois. And we got to go there as an FFA class at one point and do a massive tour, see all these engine testing dynos and all these different testing apparatuses. But one of the coolest things that they showed at the end of the day was a 3D model of an entire tractor put together, along with like the exploded out view of all the parts and the ability to go and click on any one of these parts.
Mm-hmm.
I know it was all put together for a demo now, but it just triggered something in me. And I didn't exactly know what I was going into. I actually originally went to college for welding. And then the archery opportunity came along, and I went to Southern Illinois for that. Did that and discovered SolidWorks while I was down there.
Mm-hmm.
Got a little too serious about my archery and not serious enough about going to class. So we'll just say I had to come home.
Uh-huh.
And eventually started taking some courses at my local community college. Um, got linked up with some people and had the opportunity to attend a local university for engineering. And I was 2 years into that program. And truthfully, my financial situation just changed, and I didn't want to rack on a ton of student debt. So I went to another local junior college, and then COVID happened. And so that kind of landed me sticking around home, and I kind of stepped back because the type of programs that I run for 3D design and CAD design and whatnot, um, it's really hard to learn remotely.
Hmm.
It's a lot easier when you have somebody there that you can quick ask a question to. It's not something you can learn just watching a video all the time.
Yep.
And so I stuck back for a little bit, but I knew how to run it. And so I took on some odd jobs for some people I knew. I actually started on with a local ag company called Shoop Manufacturing, and I did design work for them for almost a year. Uh, they decided to downsize their engineering staff, and then lo and behold, I ended up with Cummins in southern Indiana, and that's where I'm at now.
So that's, and don't think it. You're looking at a human being that took 10 years to get an undergraduate degree right here,
Oh,
right?
I'm in the
There,
same boat.
there was a lot, there were different things that drew my attention other than academics, that I was interested in capturing an experience and not a degree. And that, that I got a lot of life experience, a lot of fun that occurred out
Yes,
of that. But also, you're exactly right. A lot of debt, a whole lot of debt kind of came out of that. So and the reason I asked is because we had a number. I work in ag tech space, and work with software engineers, and the company that I work for that was purchased out at one point in time, we had several of our software engineers grew up on farms, you know, and so you find this uniquely tech savvy farm kid that realized they didn't want to, around here, like I didn't want to spend the rest of my life working in tobacco, but I didn't want to wander too far from the
agriculture.
the atmosphere, right? Because there's
Yeah,
a uniqueness that exists inside that atmosphere that isn't in many industries. And so they, went out and got computer software degrees, and they start working in the ag tech space, and then they go off and make, tons of money, because this is the thing. If you find companies like John Deere or CNH, any of these folks, if they find an engineer that also knows ag, that person can write their own paycheck because it's not a common thing. It's not a regular
nope.
thing. And being able to educate domain knowledge is very difficult. Educating how to code software is the easier task of the two things. But I'm seeing this group of people that grew up on farms that are now seeking tangential relationships to it, and that's I like that. I like that. But that also gives me nerds to talk about farming with, or whiskey.
Oh yeah, and I mean that's there has been a big push in the last 10 years. I've noticed. I know plenty of guys that are now full time farmers. Took over father's land, took over grandfather's land, whatever it was. They all at least went to a 2 year college back in my area for an ag business degree,
Yeah.
and they're all pretty darn successful.
Yeah, and that's it. At one point in time, a farmer could keep the financial ledger of his farm in his brain largely. And when it was profitable enough to farm 500 or 700 acres and still be able to feed your family and have a decent living, and the way agriculture's going, that's not necessarily the case anymore. So you're looking at 1,000 acres or 2,000 acres, and trying to keep all that in your head with all the inputs and outputs and the costs and the variability and the who has what, like. So
Yep.
this business mindset comes into place where you start having to treat it a little bit differently. And this is the rollover that I interact with on a daily basis, just given what I work on. The kind of software that I work in, like, these are the people that I'm dealing with regularly. And it's encouraging, because it's allowing the smallholder farmer to stay alive, right? Because if you have that
Yeah.
business acumen, it helps you to be able to compete against the 5, 7, 10,000 acre growers who can come in and pay more cash rent than you can and take land out from underneath you, just because they've got the financial resources.
Yeah. It's yeah. And the other thing to speak to it is that if you see a small family farmer, he is not just a farmer. He is a farmer. He is a mechanic. He is a
Hmm.
technician. He probably, if he has his own trucks, is running a trucking company on the side. Um,
Yeah.
Most likely doing any and every other odd job under the sun that they can fit in.
That's exactly right. And this is, and so there's this question that I have where, like I connect what I do and whiskey together in kind of a way. And you have a farming background and you can kind of connect those two things. But I start with this idea of a craft distiller and a farmer are not too different apart from each other, because a craft distiller
No,
has to be a chemist. They have to understand farming to a degree because they got to understand commodity prices and moisture content of grain as it comes in, the milling process, the fermentation process, the distillation process, maturation. And then they get into this same game that farmers get into, is that once they put distillate in a barrel and they stick it into store, it's sort of the same point that a farmer has put all the seed in the ground. They've had fertilizer and they've had their chemicals that have gone on the ground, and now they're just waiting and hoping for rain and time. And
yep,
what
you're
comes out the
just
other end,
rolling the dice.
what comes out the other end could be mediocre, it could be fantastic, or it could be a complete bust. And that's
Yeah,
exactly like farmers and distillers have the exact same patterns of behavior and skill sets where you got to just figure out how to fix things, at least at a small level. Like your craft distillers and farmers are just tied together in a very romantic way. But so for you, I've said a lot of things. What is your like ag and whiskey connection, or do you have one? Do you have something like that?
my ag and whiskey connection. It kind of comes back to our topic today of talking about whiskey acres. So I can remember finding out about whiskey acres starting up production when I was in high school, and that's when all of these things kind of crossed paths with me. Was I was so busy in the FFA, but I was most certainly imbibing in some adult beverages on the weekends. And
Hmm.
so there came that crossroads of like, oh, wait, farmers make whiskey? Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. That's it for me. And it kind of clicked from there, and eventually, through the power of YouTube, you can look up so much and you can find so many little documentaries or even little 10-minute snippet videos from a distillery or something. I just became enamored with the art and the love and the heritage that distilling bourbon had.
Hmm. And that, and that's I've thought about this a couple times, because we, being an ag tech company in a rural area, we have FFA rolling through our office all the time. They want to come in, they want to do a tour, and they want to talk about what we're working on, because it's a unique career path for an FFA person. Thinking about software and working for, kind of a large corporation, but in a rural setting and impacting the modern American farmer. It's not something that they regularly kind of understand unless you just happen to have that in your space. But FFA should lean into distillation. I've thought this, like, like this is a potential and positive career path, and I understand why they don't. Let me back up and saying, like, it's all a bunch of high school kids, and you don't necessarily want to talk about grain alcohol with them. But as a career path, you have a ton of people that are going into food and hospitality in their collegiate career path and coming out the other end and ending up in whiskey because of its relationship to hospitality, but it has an equal, if not larger, relationship to agriculture in my mind. Wait, FFA should lean into this.
Yeah, and I want to take a moment to get up on the soapbox real quick. FFA is one of the best young people organizations out there, bar none. And without it, it shaped so much of my future. Without
Yep.
it, I don't know what would be going. But yeah, that, John, if we ever figure out how to get distilling in the FFA, I'm going back to Illinois to my home chapter,
Uh-huh.
and oh, we're cooking hooch. Come along, kids.
Right, and maybe you start with just distilling water and showing the scientific process of it and how it can be benefit. But so I say all that because I say the F, and that's, you're right. FFA is an incredibly important organization, and this is the other part of it. I think you've got your soapbox. My soapbox is that for a kid that didn't grow up on I didn't grow up on a farm. My family were people who build homes, right? Like that's kind of in a rural area. You've got plumbers, electricians, farmers, mechanics, and then your random smattering of other things. And we were home builders, so we didn't dabble into the farming too much because we were just trying to figure out how to make square walls. But thinking about my high school experience, FFA to me was reserved for the farm kids, and it's really not, right? As an organization, it is akin to any other teenage enrichment program that makes them understand life, business, relationships, maturity, growth, whatever. Like there's a ton of things that go into playing it that are beyond that. And so my FFA spoke box is it's not just for the farm kids. Like if you just because if you don't grow up on a farm, there's still a place of value there.
Oh, absolutely. And it used to be FFA stood for Future Farmers of America.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the National FFA organization now. FFA
Mm-hmm.
is just a name. It's a
Yep.
brand name essentially.
Yeah.
And honestly, the best thing that you go through with FFA is, and I think they should change the name of this. It's called an SAE, or at least it was when I was there, your supervised agricultural experience. Essentially, for a lot of people, that is here. I am going to begin a business of some sort, whether it
Mm-hmm.
be I'm raising these 4 pigs, I'm raising this 10 acres of corn, or in my case, I did outdoor recreation. I managed call tuning and guiding hunts in high school for waterfowl.
Mm-hmm.
It, it gets you involved in a business sense of whatever it is that you're getting into. And I think they should just change it to SEE, call it a C, supervised entrepreneurial experience.
Right. It takes because being in the program, you understood that there was an opportunity to do something beyond what might be considered traditional, farm concepts or agricultural. But if your kid's standing outside trying to figure out like what would how do I fit into that atmosphere?
Yeah.
It's a barrier to entry, and you're exactly right there. Um, so we'll shift a little bit and start talking about Whiskey Acres specifically, right? And so Whiskey Acres is a farm distillery, and you know you can run into a number of different things when you hear farm distillery, and in some places it's a rural distillery that has partnered with local farms, and they're kind of distilling grain, which is maybe a little bit of a misnomer, but they go with that because they can tell you the first and last name of every person they bought grain from, and they may only buy from one person, and so I can kind of let people slide. Or they don't really have the answers to that. It's just a marketing, kind of gimmick. And then there's people like Whiskey Acres. So you introduced me to get Whiskey Acres. What makes them more interesting than some other farm distilleries?
So Whiskey Acres is, as they call it, they are seed to spirit instead of grain to glass. Um, they are in DeKalb, Illinois, which, if anybody is familiar with the Corn Belt and some of the most fertile soil in the state of Illinois, it is right there in north central Illinois. You can grow 250 bushel corn all day long. It ain't tough. So long as you're taking care of fertilizer and whatnot. I'm not saying you can just plant it in the ground and get 250, but it, you're not struggling for it. Um, so the family had the idea to get into brain tongue get in line, please. The family had the idea to get into distilling when they discovered that back right around turn of the century, 1900 area, some of their predecessors had distilled on that site. And so right there in DeKalb, they own, I don't know the exact number of acres, but I will say it's well over 250 acres that surround the distillery. They own all that land. And so they set up and went through the process. And one of the best things they did was before they even ran a single drop of anything, they consulted with Dave Pickrell of Whistlepig, of Blackened, of
Mm-hmm.
Maker's Mark. he Whiskey Acres was one of his last projects before his unfortunate passing. And they consulted with him on how to do things. And
Mhm.
through that as well, two very non-traditional grains to be grown in the Midwest are barley and rye. Rye, especially, they worked with their seed providers to find varietals that they could grow regularly and healthily.
Mhm.
So when I say that they grow everything, they grow corn, rye, wheat, and barley all right there. They mill it all right there. The only thing that they outsource is there's a malt house, I believe, 5 miles down the road, and they send the barley out to be malted by them and then brought back. They bottle everything there, they age everything there, they distill everything there. And the best part is when you drive by, it's in, well, you and I know them as Morton buildings. We know them as a farm shop
Mhm.
because there's the one half of that building where, oh, that's the still house area. And then you get to the other half and there's Rick's there, but on the other side, yeah, there's a bunch of old John Deere boxes stacked up, some old car seats hanging out that are seats for
It's a
sitting
farm
in there.
operation. This is
Oh,
this is
it's a
the head
farm
shed of a
operation.
farm.
Oh yeah, exactly. And the thing is, when they take you on a tour, you will end up going across the way and oh yeah, here, welcome to our shed. This is where, the planter and the combine and all this is. That's also where our grain mill is too.
Mhm.
So they're going to show you that. And a lot of their stuff is aged one in an old Quonset hut. So, the old
Yep.
half circle deal. And another part of it is they took a grain silo and turned it into a rick house.
A grain silo. So like a vertical grain silo?
Yep.
How high up are they going in the grain silo?
From what I've heard, I've never been inside.
Uh-huh.
From what I've heard, they're getting 6, 7 barrels high.
That is, I appreciate all of that because I know how hot grain silos get. And so when I think about the aging process, I'm on board with that. And I want to see long term how that behaves versus traditional rick houses and their storage or whatever. Like that's interesting. I'm gonna put that on my notes of the day that if anyone from that brand ever like, yeah, we'll let you talk to us. I'm gonna ask about that because I like this. This is the best. It's better than people that are turning grain silos into houses. Like there's a bunch of people that do that.
Oh,
No. Let's turn it into some whiskey storage. Let's go that route.
yeah. Use it for something that's worthwhile. All right. It's still storing grain then.
Yeah,
It's just
and
doing it a little different.
to kind of add some color into the DeKalb conversation. Um, it's a city, but it's also a
A college
corporation,
town.
right? But it's a corporation. Like
Oh,
DeKalb
yeah.
is
Bob
so
Seed.
if you think about corn, like it is a corn genetics company. That's how prominent this particular county and area is for corn in the United States, not just for Illinois. I mean, you'll see the corn cob with the wings all across the Midwest and Kentucky and Tennessee and a ton of places. I mean, it's a brand. There's a brand that exists out there, and people pick it up, and it's got a high degree of notoriety. So there's a lot of science that goes behind, and that I think that's another place where whiskey and agriculture are interesting to me is that there's so much science behind the work that no one ever considers that's not a part of the industry, right? Like
Oh,
the common
God.
person driving by a cornfield doesn't think about science at all, not thinking about fertilizer loads, AI loads on fields, grain types, weather patterns, all of these things in the same fashion. They're not thinking about chemical reactions that occur, the complex chemical reaction that occurs to create whiskey
Oh, yeah.
is just amazing, right? And then there's like there's alchemy here. There's science and art and all of these wonderful things. But um, on farm distilleries are both the future and past of whiskey in the United States, right? Like
Yes.
the reason why we have whiskey is because farmers needed a way to store grain before we had a way to store grain, right? Like we didn't
Yep.
understand drying down grain and being able to keep corn for multiple years. So we were like, hey, we can turn it into this clear liquid that decreases the volume that you need to store it. And it is shelf stable indefinitely with tons of different uses. We just so happened to find we also could drink it, right? Like,
It is also quite delicious, and it will fix all that ails you.
yeah, you need it to clean out a wound, perfectly fine. You need it to help you feel better before you clean out the wound. You probably drink it, then you pour it in, right? Like that's the take a
Yep.
shot, pour it in the bullet wound, bite on the spoon. This is how it works.
Right.
Um, the uh, maybe you know this. I've tried to do this backwards calculation. I keep giving up. Do you know how many acres of corn it takes to make a bottle of whiskey?
Nope.
So I've tried to think about this, like, because I don't know exactly what the conversion rate is, and so I've got to get with a farm, like an on-farm distillery, and be like, how many pounds of corn go in, and how much whiskey comes out the other end. Because if I can get those two numbers, I'm not trying to figure out your scientific process. I just want to know, like, how many pounds of corn or how many acres of corn have to go in to make a bottle, to make a glass, to make a whatever. Because it seems like a nerdy thing that I want to know.
I can get you Nick, one of the owner's emails. I
Mm-hmm.
know he has told me how many pounds per bottle it is. He
Yep.
puts that in the tour. Just can't remember it. So if you want to reach out to him, I'll get to with you after this, and he will be
Absolutely.
more than happy to nerd out with you.
Yeah, because that's it. Just I don't know. In the same way that for my business, my job is trying to get the dollar back to the acre, right? So whenever you yield off of a field, you have your input cost, you have your revenue. How do we get it back to the acre to tell you what your profitability is and how do you what? But I want the same romantic nature of how do I get back to the field with this, right? How do I get all the way back down to the dirt where it came from, the soil that kind of began this process, and
I
sort
would
of
love
respect
to
it.
know that because I would definitely take that as information to my doctor. Be
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I am not drinking 6 glasses of whiskey a week. I'm drinking 36 pounds of corn. Thank you.
I'm going to say he's still not going to be okay with that because we're technically not really built to consume that much corn. Like, it's tall grass is what it really is. But, um,
It's green at one point in its life.
right, right. Um, so there's a malt house in Illinois. Like, how many malt houses are there in Illinois? Is there a bunch? I guess maybe there's a high call for malted corn somewhere.
Well, they're malting the barley there.
Right, but I'm just saying, like the existence of a malt house
So,
prior to needing
oh,
to malt barley.
well, you got to think about this. Think about breweries,
Hmm. Hmm.
the craft beer scene,
That's fair. That's fair.
and you got to realize DeKalb, 1 hour outside of Chicago.
Hmm.
Chicago, massive epicenter for craft beer scene at one point. Pretty easy for that to get out that way.
All right, hold on. I've got notes here. I've got to go back to. I'm trying to stay in the whiskey acres before I go back to personal questions. Um, so they distill. Do you know what? Maybe you have to answer this. You can answer this. Maybe you can't. Do you know what kind of corn they're using? Are they using just normal
Number two, yellow dent,
number two yellow dent? Do they have any
probably
special bottlings of
non-GMO.
corn? Not not like that matters. Um,
It doesn't matter, but it's funny.
that's it makes people
Here's
feel.
here's a soapbox we can get on, John.
We don't even have to get on the soapbox. For anyone that wants to watch or listen to this episode, that wants to think about GMO corn versus non-GMO corn, specifically in a distilled spirit situation. If you've ever seen the movie Tommy Boy, have you ever seen the movie
Oh
Tommy? You've seen the
yes,
movie Tommy Boy. There's a
fat
portion where he's
guy in little
right. Well,
coat.
there's a portion where he's talking about a guarantee on a box. The man who's wanting to buy the brake pads wants a guarantee on the box because it makes him feel comfortable. He can go to sleep at night and he can be happy about it. And Tommy has a really strong reaction and retort to the idea of a guarantee on a box. And that is very similar to how you probably would react to someone saying, well, we can't, I need it to tell me it's non GMO corn on the bottle. Right?
I
Like,
can take a
it's,
shit in the box and slap a guarantee on it. All I've done is sell you a guaranteed piece of shit.
I get, I got time. I got time. I can do all of this. Like, if something's wrong with it, you can give me a call. He's like, but there's no guarantee on the box, keeping everybody happy. It
I
doesn't matter
love
for this
that
conversation.
movie.
This is the exact reaction. It does not matter for this
No,
conversation, the GMO portion. Um,
it
do
doesn't.
do they do any unique bottlings?
Yes, I've actually got two of them right here. This is, I'll see if I can get it up on the camera. Learn how to turn the bottle more on.
It says it's an artisan series. I don't know that I can't. Hold on. Let me see if I can.
All right. No, I got a bad camera. So this is straight bourbon whiskey made from glass gem corn,
Mm-hmm.
which, if you've ever seen it, looks like corn went to a rave. It is pearlescent. It is yellow. It is blue. It is green. It is red. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's this one created a really apple forward bourbon. Honestly, I really
Mm-hmm.
loved it, and I do owe you a sample of this. I am just the world's worst shipper. That's why I don't run a logistics
That
company.
that is untrue. Now, number one, we technically are not shipping whiskey anywhere. We are using couriers who are hand delivering whiskey,
This
right?
is true.
That is what is occurring. And you aren't the worst because you did not courier whiskey to a person where it goes to an entirely other state
Well,
and
look,
get
the courier got
someone
lost.
got some free couriered whiskey.
Yeah, that courier got lost. I don't know how that courier got lost.
The only thing I can think is that the label got somehow jacked up and they stuck another label over top of it. I don't know. I don't know.
And then this is one of my favorites. This is bourbon finished in maple syrup barrels. And if you are familiar with the movie Super Troopers, are you?
Yep.
That
It's the
syrup?
maple syrup. It's the syrup chugging. Syrup chugging.
Yes, yes, it
Nice.
is. I helped pick that bottle, so I'm very proud of that one.
Yeah.
It is
So
quite good.
so the do you have any indication? So for exactly what you're
And
saying, you know,
yeah,
if anybody wants to
they've
think
also
about,
got some other bottlings.
mhm,
Those are just the two I have on hand.
yep.
They do a yearly or twice a year. They do a limited release as often as they can ish of blue
Hmm.
popcorn bourbon. So they replaced the number two yellow dent with blue popcorn. And that creates a very unique flavor. I haven't
Hmm.
had it in so long, I couldn't truly tell you what that one tastes like. Um, they also do, um, they have Bloody Butcher aging right now. They have yet to release it, and I know that's already up to 5 years. They also do sweet corn. They just released about a month or so ago their first ever bottled in bond sweet corn.
Bottled and bond.
Yes, that's the other thing. They released it at bottled in bond. They didn't even bring it out at low proof.
Hmm. And this is I've thought about this regularly. Is you know, you've been in tasting events, right?
Oh
You've
yeah,
been to tasting events, and you get a lot of people who are like, this has a lot of corn flavor to it, right? And I have a distinct, here's my soapbox for the day. Well, not my only soapbox for the day. Here's my next soapbox is that
get on it, John. Let's hear it.
how how many people do you know that are at those events that you feel like fairly comfortable that they understand the difference between corn that they buy at the grocery store and the yellow dent number two that went into the making of this whiskey? Because those are two distinctly different things. Like,
Different.
if you go out into some, you know, if you go out into central Illinois and you go into somebody's field and you pick an ear of corn and you bring it home and you boil the shit out of that and then eat it, it is not going to taste like what you're used to.
No, I don't. Besides those who maybe, how do I want to put this politely? Besides those who are maybe more known,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll throw out one name because I don't think he's ever going to have an issue with me saying it anyways. Fred Minnick.
Yeah,
I'll bet you Fred Minnick knows the difference between field corn and sweet corn.
I would say he does now. But when he
Yes.
first started using the corn note, because it's a real
No,
common thing. Like
90% of
this
people
is
that use the corn note are talking about sweet corn taste. They're
right.
not talking
Well,
about actual corn taste.
the only thing that kind of that may give them some credence is that they can parse through a flavor that is unique. And every time they've ever heard someone say corn, that like, this is a corn forward whiskey, that's the flavor they're getting. They're not actually tasting, but I really feel like they're saying like this tastes like sweet corn, which like there's no relationship between those two. And so say I think this tastes like sweet corn because sweet corn and field corn don't taste the same. And
No.
if you're saying corn syrup, which is a whole other thing, you're talking about some Cairo, that's a
Yeah.
different conversation too, right? And that's I don't get too invested in
So
tasting notes because of that exact conversation.
so to me, and again, I know you don't get invested in tasting notes. If
Mhm.
I say something tastes corn forward, I'm talking about field corn usually, and that's when
Yeah.
I'm going to taste a like dustiness
Yes.
because to
Yes.
me that's what I get off of real field corn. I'm thinking of, when you're harvesting, you get that red chaff in the air from the cob
Yep.
and all
You
that
might get a
stuff.
grassy texture to it because of what's
Yep.
coming off of the silage portion. Like the whenever I hear corn and I don't nobody's talking about sweet corn, I literally think about I'm driving past a field that is being combined right now. They're processing it, and you get the dust that's in the air. You get the grass that's coming off of it, the actual the fiber portion of it,
Yep.
and some chalky, starchy conversation, which exists in a ton of whiskeys. I don't have a problem with that, and if I'm just wrong and everybody else understands this, like that's just like the I've been doing this for a while and nobody's had this conversation, but maybe there was a meeting. Maybe there's a meeting somewhere and they're like, this is what it is. This is what corn
Did
tastes
we
like. And
miss the meeting, John?
I don't feel like I was invited and this is some bullshit.
Neither was I.
Maybe they just felt like, these guys work in a certain space or came from a background. They know what we're talking about already. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case
No.
at all. And that's where we can be snobs of snobs, right? Because we know what real corn is going to
Let
smell like.
me tell you all about real corn, kid.
If you want to know what the flavor is, go to the store, buy some cornmeal, toss a handful of that in your mouth, then you're good to go, right? And
That's
maybe they're referring to that too. I don't know.
that. I mean, that's the best description, though.
Shit. All right. So I went down the path. So
You
backing up
know
a little
this is
more.
going to be a long episode, right?
I mean, I hope so. I've had some just kind of on time ones just based off of scheduling more than anything. But the the gym corn that you were talking about, for folks that are kind of imagining this in their brain, any marketing image of Thanksgiving corn that you've ever seen likely had some glass gym corn in there because it's got the
Yes.
multicolored, just crazy looking corn that you've never seen in your life. I don't know that is glass gem considered a field corn? Is it considered more in the sweet corn vein where you're actually just supposed to legitimately eat this?
I really don't know. I know it as an heirloom varietal,
Yeah.
and I just know it makes darn good whiskey.
Yep, absolutely. So it is. I don't. Sweet corn may not be the right way to describe that, but it is in
Yeah,
the
is it
what's
more
considered
direct
for
human
consumption.
consumption
Yeah,
or is it
it's
to
a
be
human.
processed?
So I just hit a quick Google, and yeah, it is for human. It is a human consumption corn. I mean, because anything that is human consumption corn, you can use for other things. I mean, it's the same thing of the sweet corn conversation. They're making sweet corn bourbon, which is unique, and not many people are doing that.
Mm-mm.
And I've wondered that a lot. Why? I've heard some people say it's more difficult because of starch contents, and when it dries down, your volume is so much less, and so your prices have to be so high. But could it also be because for the effort, it's just not that much better. Like I don't know, and that's
So,
once again why I need to try all the things.
so bit more background on me. I proclaimed my brother the sweet corn king of Illinois.
Mhm.
This man, if I have dove down the rabbit hole to the nth degree of whiskey, he jumped down same rabbit hole for sweet corn knowledge.
Uh-huh.
He has sat there and started plants inside the house and then gone and hand planted them out in the field before.
Oh Lord.
Just because he was curious about something one time.
Right.
I have watched him count out the amount of kernels that go into each box
Mm-hmm.
and weigh out the amount of graphite to each box to make sure he is not wasting a thing and that everything comes out right in line. He used to work for a company called Precision Planting, though.
Okay.
So his whole job back then was setting up and calibrating seed meters for modern day planting equipment. So he had all this at his disposal. But to get back, I guess, to the conversation of sweet corn, you've got a multitude of different factors there. One, you brought up the starch content. Yes, your overall when it's dried down is going to be way less
Mm-hmm.
because sweet corn just doesn't produce as much as field corn does on a cob per acre. It's just the facts of life. Number two, sweet corn is a whole lot more easily damaged by the weather than regular field corn. If you look at a sweet corn stalk, it's about yay big around. If you look at a
Mm-hmm.
field corn stalk nowadays, good lord, they're like a Louisville slugger.
And they're about 75 feet tall.
Yes, exactly. So you have that factored into it, and truthfully, the flavor that you get from it, think of the most rich Werther's original butterscotch caramel.
Okay.
You are right in confectionery sugarland. That's where you land when you distill this grain and age it in oak. And it is amazing. Is it now Whiskey Acres? They released their bottled and bond for $80. There's another competitor on the market. They released theirs $100 more.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure I agree with that, but to each their own. I don't know everybody's inputs to outputs and everybody's tax rates and all that.
Right. There can be variability, and you know you could be at that point
But
also eating 5 or 7 failed experiments and trying to recoup your expenses because maybe you lost half your aged product because you just lost it, right? And so that's because this is the other part of the uniqueness of whiskey is that you can go in with 100 barrels and come out with 60 barrels that still have whiskey in them because
yeah,
of whatever. And so your variability and cost can be there. And I I catch myself doing the same thing where I'll compare one brand against the other when they're doing similar things, but I try to always back up to do I feel that I got an appropriate value for us for what I spent on the bottle itself? Not comparing it to anybody. Now, whenever I think about if I'm gonna buy a second one, then it's gonna be okay, well, if I can get similar, if not slightly less quality, but at a significantly better price point. I mean, we all got budgets. Like I got, I
exactly.
have children to feed. I have things to take care of. So I get that.
Man, I just got a whiskey habit to feed, and that alone is killing me. And also, hey, when will this end up? When will this end up? Are we live on YouTube
We're
or
live
is
on
this being
YouTube right
published?
now. Yeah, we're live on YouTube right now. The audio version will publish Tuesday morning early.
Okay. Never mind. Carson won't watch anyway. Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, the other part of my budget is about to be eaten up.
I was gonna dance around that, man. I wasn't gonna say a word about it, and so we'll just kind of leave that out there. Um, you also mentioned blue popcorn. What do you know
Yes.
about popcorn farming?
Oh, so I don't know a lot about popcorn farming. I actually know quite a bit about popcorn making, though. A
Mm-hmm.
good friend of mine back in Illinois runs a family popcorn shop.
Yeah, we had one here in town, and the only reason I ask is because until I started working in the job that I'm in right now, I did not realize that popcorn, in the same way that sweet corn is, is a different commodity than field corn, right?
all
And so
together.
you're raising for popcorn, you're raising for sweet corn, or you're raising for field corn. And there, there's some other things out there. Are you raising your field corn for animal consumption? Are you raising it for ethanol? Or, like what are you trying to actually get at, right? There's a lot of nuance to it, but specifically, I didn't know that popcorn was its own separate thing, and so I haven't ever spent any time like diving into it. But did you get to taste the blue popcorn, or the blue popcorn isn't out yet?
I've gotten to taste the blue popcorn, but it was well over a year ago.
Uh
So I have had too many drinks since then to even try to give a tasting note.
huh.
It tasted good. I
Uh-huh.
remember that.
That's the only note that matters, realistically. Like everything after that is just pomp and circumstance. It's good or it's bad. Well, maybe I take it back. It can be good, it can be great, it can be fantastic. Like these are all things that we all sort of understand, but everything after that is just based off of your experience. Like everyone understands great. Like we both got an opportunity to taste some pretty fantastic Michter's whiskey at one point in time, right? And there's no
Oh,
note I'll ever give off of that whiskey other than it was an amazing whiskey experience, right? Like that's what it
yeah.
was for me. I don't need to give any other note that exists because
You see, you bring that up, and now I'm looking at that Fort Nelson bottle going, you know, do I need another sip?
mine is unopened, and my intent is to keep it unopened potentially until Memorial Day weekend, when there's an opportunity for some of the same people to be in the same room to open the bottle and drink it again.
Absolutely.
Now, will it make it till then? I don't know yet, but it's made it so far.
Yeah, I shared some with my local cigar lounge owner after the
Mm-hmm.
Avalanche won the Stanley Cup.
Yep.
He's a big hockey fan. I was hanging out there for the entirety of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, that bottle's barely been touched. Now the Shanks, on the other hand, that I got that day, whew, it was a good soldier, and it's doing its job, but boy, it's losing its battle quickly.
Yeah, and that's part of the other reason why I try to buy faster than I drink is that I'll never finish a bottle at this point. Right? Like I'll get down to a
Yep,
little bit and be like, oh well, I'll move on to something else and kind of keep that little friend around. I've been milking the same, Buffalo Trace single oak project that they did a dozen years ago or whatever. I've been milking that same tiny bottle for like 5 years.
uh, yeah, I'm probably in the same boat with the Masters Keeps lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Although I do have
They're not
to,
replaceable.
although I do have to really get into that 1894. It's still a full bottle, and that's just disappointing.
Well, I think if anybody has the skill or ability to tackle that, you're definitely one of those people for sure. So we've covered. They've got a Bloody Butcher that's at 5 years that hasn't been released yet. Sweet Corn, which they do in a seasonal release, which is bottle and bond, which is just amazing. That may be worth a drive up there. I may need to find a reason why I've got to go visit some farmers and make my way into the community. Be like, hey, I'm here to get some whiskey.
You'll be standing in line.
Yeah, I mean, that's there are lines that are worth standing in. Like
Oh
liquor
yeah,
store releases, I may not be the person, but a distillery who's doing something unique, they deserve it. They absolutely deserve it.
absolutely.
Um, all right, so we're gonna kick back. We're gonna kick back to some personal stuff. You said that in your SAE you did a thing on waterfowl hunting.
Yeah,
So are you an avid waterfowl hunter, or is it something you used to do that you don't do anymore?
I would definitely say it's something I used to do that I don't do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All that came from um, my older brother got into it. I wanted to be like him, and then I dove down a rabbit hole about calling, and I found out, and this is something I'm actually trying to pursue still. Illinois is a freaking hotbed of legendary call makers
Mm-hmm.
and has influenced call making as a whole in ways I could never fathom. So that has always been something cool to me that I would love to try and get the history all put together for someone and be able to go look at this. here's a family tree essentially of like this company started this company, started this company, yada yada yada. And yeah, back then, I mean, well, here I'll just show you. I happen to have a goose call nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Fair warning for your earbuds, though, you might get blasted out.
Oh, I'm fully aware. Now is Carson in the house with you right now?
Oh yes, she is.
So did you send the pretext of like everything's fine? I was supposed to do that.
No, she's just come to accept that at random times on random days, that noise is just gonna appear.
Mm-hmm. So
And so
go ahead.
So yeah, back in high school, I was fortunate enough to grow up around an area that had a nuclear cooling lake, and so 70-degree water in the middle of negative 20-degree weather, that's where all the ducks and geese flock to. So we had a lot of hunt clubs in the area, and I happened to get the opportunity to work with one when I was younger. And so I would take people out to their property and I would be in charge of setting up the decoys, calling in birds and telling them when the birds were finally close enough to take the shot. And the other thing that I did on the side was I actually tuned calls. So, I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, I mean, a call is simple as it comes. You have a reed stuck between two pieces of plastic with a trough opening at the end. Works just like any other reeded instrument, whether that be a clarinet or an oboe or anything of that such nature. You have to get them in tune to get the right
Mm-hmm.
tone. And
So
for
how
some
do you get to
people,
knowing like what the right tone is? Like, is this just by ear or
so
you?
it's definitely by ear, but it's also, you have to kind of look at the call that you're playing with. So here's one that I use all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this little guy that I play with occasionally. They're meant to have different tones. Again,
Right.
warning for your ears. That's a lot louder, a lot poppier, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the sound that I wanted to get out of it. And so what you look for is kind of this top to bottom range. You know, can it hit this when you're trying to like whine at them and get their attention? And can it go down into the that low growly sound? And you want to be able to run from top to bottom without any big air slip, which when I talk about like air slip or air leak, that just means how tight that reed sits up against the trough.
Mm-hmm.
If it's too far back, you've got a whole bunch of wasted air. You're going to have to blow a lot harder. You're not going to be as efficient. If it's too
Mm-hmm.
far forward, you won't even be able to pop it over.
So whenever you're out guiding this, like how do you know which call to use? Because I mean, I know you're the guy. Like you've got the lanyard, you got like
Oh yeah.
47 calls.
Yep.
There's probably some bands on it, right? Like you
Zero.
zero band. Really? Is this a
In all
like you
these
don't keep
years,
them, or
zero
you just haven't
bands.
killed any bands?
I just haven't killed any bands.
Well, that's surprising. But anyway, so if you
And that
had one, there would be
happens.
bands on it, right? Like
Oh yeah.
that would be that would be the existence. But like how you pick, like, is it just instinct? Do you just
So
over time or?
so it depends on a lot of variables. First one being time of year. So
Mm-hmm.
am I hunting local birds that have been around for all summer, or am I hunting a fresh set of migrators that just came in the last week? If I'm hunting migrators, I'm going to opt for something like this that's a little bit higher pitched. Maybe not this exact call, but you get the idea. I want to go
Yep.
higher. I want to scream a little bit because they're generally going to be flying at a higher altitude, and volume won't reach them up there. Pitch
Mm-hmm.
will. The other thing is I look at how much hunting pressure is right around me. So let's say I'm in a field here. Well, is Jimbo in this field over here and is Billy Bob in that field down there? Okay, well, let me listen to what they decide to do on that first flock in the morning. All right, they're
Mm-hmm.
both going with high pitched calls. I'm going to grab the lowest pitch thing I have and call as slow as I can
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going to set myself apart. Another thing is I look at material as well. So, like this gray call, this is made out of acrylic. This call has a Coca-Cola wood insert.
Hmm.
So completely different tones there. A lot more warm and rich tone in this. But if it's windy, they're not going to hear that near as well.
Hmm.
So it's uh, to quote one of my favorite quotes from Pat McAfee: "Situations are situational,"
Hmm.
and
You're not wrong. And that, I learned a little bit about duck calls and goose calls because at one point, we were talking earlier about like you get into things. I've got a lathe in my shop out here, a wood lathe, and trying to figure out like what can I make. You can only make so many bowls before, unless you're a true artist. Like if you're a true artist, you can make bowls forever because you can imagine shapes and you can wood grain. I'm not an artist. I just, I would probably be a production creator of
yeah,
things. It wouldn't be a piece of artwork. But you come across duck calls. I'm like, oh well, this is a thing I think I could do. And then the more I dove into it, I was like, no, these people are serious. Like I could build you a souvenir duck call that you could
yes,
have somebody's name laser etched on and hope they never take it into a field. But man, there's a lot of intention and
and
serious relationships with duck calls.
I got to tell you, I don't even jack with duck calls that much. I stick
Mhm.
to my goose calls because they are truly a much simpler device.
Yeah.
Here, I've got a bag of. Actually, no, I've got one right next to me. What am I thinking? Um, a duck call works similarly, but you've got this whole tone channel here
Yep.
that is set at a very specific angle, drilled to a very specific depth, and like
It's
the tiniest change can throw the whole thing off.
Yep. And I don't have that. I'm not that precision guy. Like I said, we came from home builders, not home
I
finishers.
can't
When
do
it
it.
comes to finish work, it's not for me. It's not a thing that I'm capable of.
I
So when you hunt geese, because there are people that hunt geese for sport, and they don't do anything with an animal after the fact, and that has some value because I've seen what geese can do to the edges of fields on a regular basis when it comes to corn or soy or any type of anything they can get their hands on. Geese can devastate a crop. But are you a consumer or are you a hunter? Like what do you do with a goose once it's on the ground?
So for me, most times, I use the goose two different. Well, I use the goose the same way, but it's used two ways.
Hmm.
First, I'm going to breast them out, so I'll cut right down the breastbone, take those big, nice, beautiful chunks of lean red meat out.
Hmm.
That's generally actually going to get blended in with duck and or
Hmm.
with pork to just make a. I call it a outdoorsman sausage or an
Hmm.
outdoorsman burger, just something kind of simple. And then what I will also do is I will take that carcass and then we will toss those out in the field as bait piles to hunt coyotes.
Gotcha. Nothing goes to waste there. And I've not done much waterfowl hunting of any type because it's just cold, man. It's usually
It
cold,
is,
and
and
I'm not interested.
well, and it's sad, honestly, for me. It's like, hi, yes, I was a national champion archer. You
Hmm.
would think I would be a deer hunter.
Hmm.
Nope. Uh-uh. You've met me. You know,
Uh-huh.
sit still and be quiet are two things I
Uh-huh.
cannot do.
Hmm.
So I had to get into waterfowl because it was so much more fun.
Yeah,
The
it's
best
more. It's
days
it's
of
a lot
my
more
life,
active.
the best days of my life have been spent in a cold field, sitting there cussing with my friends, going, "Why did we think this was going to work?"
The last time that I went duck hunting, it was we were going to get fitted for tuxedos for one of my friends' weddings, and he lives in southern Indiana, and they had a lake where you can public draw every morning, and you can go out and get in a blind. And we drew a blind. We're gonna go get in this blind, and somebody was already in it, and we're not the like we're gonna argue with you about it, and so he was like, "Well, we'll go over here and we'll set up in these weeds. We've got some blonde weeds. The boat was similarly colored. We sit up in it, and it spit a light snow for 5 hours, and we saw maybe two ducks the
Yep.
entire 5 hours we were there, and it was it was an experience. And then as we kind of progressed through the day, we realized like what we thought were two people sitting in the blind we were supposed to be in were not. It was just like you go in right at the sun coming up, and shapes can look like things. I don't know if you said you don't
Oh
deer
yeah,
hunt, but if you've ever been deer hunting, when the sun comes up, a bush can look like a monster deer, and it's not. It's just a bush. And so, but we're
squirrels
already
can
set up.
sound like a monster deer.
Yeah, and we're already set up and we're locked into our space, and we're not going to row back across the lake because we don't have a motored boat because we can't have one on this particular lake.
Yep.
You got to oar your way across it, not row. The people in southern Indiana called it oaring, which I didn't. That's a weird word, man.
That is a bit odd.
Yeah, but anyways, we just didn't do it, and so I've not been a big fan of that. But one of my coworkers is, loves to go goose hunting just on a regular basis, and so a couple years ago, I was like, hey, if you kill any, like, I'll take a couple, because he normally would either make jerky or he'd make dog food out of it. He wasn't a huge food person, but I'm obviously into food, and I had a pastrami recipe that I wanted to try. Like, I have a recipe to take goose breast and turn into pastrami, and so he calls me and he was like, "All right, we killed like 16 geese." I'm like, "Sweet, cool." He's like, "Meet me, at the sporting goods store down the road here." So I go up there and pull up, and he's like, "All right, here you go." And he pops them on the top. I was like, "How many am I supposed to get?" He's like, "No, you're taking all of them."
Oh,
Right. So I was just wanting like 3, maybe 4. Like, I want to test this out. And so now I'm in a position of like, I have to process like 16 geese.
32 breasts that are bigger than my hand. Each one of those breasts weighs about 2 pounds.
It was a lot. It was a lot,
Yeah,
man.
I'm doing the math here. I'm going, oh
And I'm not going to,
no.
like, he was nice enough dude. So I'm like, cool. Yeah, I'll come get it. So I go over there, I pick the stuff up, I bring it back home. And my wife comes out to the shop, because I've got everything hanging up in the shop. I'm like, all right, I'll work my way through it. It was cold enough so they could hang, right? So it wasn't,
Yeah.
too bad or whatever. And it took me like 3 days to get through what I needed to get through, because I didn't have just a block of 6 hours to do these things. I got kids, I got other stuff going on, and it was delicious. It was absolutely delicious.
Oh
So it
yeah.
worked out. It was some good pastrami.
It's great stuff. And I will say, I've been in your shoes of trying to go into like a public blind draw. Honestly, for me, that's why I loved hunting geese because we didn't have to be on the water. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
also that moron who's laying in a field when it's negative 25 out, going, yeah, 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 they're going to come here today. No, they're
This is a
not.
good idea. I promise it's a good idea.
No, they're not. Go
Mm.
home, you
Yeah.
moron.
There are days that don't work out, but it's that, and usually that's the other part that I think that is fun about waterfowl hunting that doesn't exist in most other, like, you usually do it in a group,
Group,
right?
yep.
So you got folks around, and so you have that shared experience of just this
Whether good
sucks.
or bad.
And the farther you get from the fact that it sucks, you get to have that like fun, reminiscent conversation. You remember that time we were out there and we saw nothing, and I got like a little bit of frostbite on the tip of my toe, but like, you can fondly remember it 6 months later.
Yeah, so I mean, my best memory was a day where we had all the birds in the area. It felt like we
Hmm.
didn't kill a single one. Um, it was a foggy morning. It was closing day of goose season, so this would have been January 31st,
Hmm.
roughly. Um, and so in the fog, geese get a lot less vocal, but they attract to whatever is vocal and whatever is real.
Hmm.
When the fog's thick enough, we had a, we had the first flock land into us, and I
Hmm.
could see the next what I thought was just the next flock coming. So I was like, "Hey, let's hold up. We're gonna let these first 6 land, and then we'll take them all together." No,
Hmm.
that's not what happened. That 6 was preceded by another 6 and another 10 and another 100. Before we knew it, we had what we estimate to be about 5,000 birds in this field. And we're all just in layout blinds like this going, well, they're
Who's going
going
to
to
be
be
the
here
first
a
one to
while.
break? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, it was a really cool experience because if you've ever paid attention to how vocal geese are and how
Hmm.
territorial they are, it was really unique to see that. But at the same time, You're talking about four under the age of 18 boys, shotguns loaded.
Hmm.
The discipline that took to
A
not
lot.
just go hog wild.
Right.
God.
It looks like a massacre. That field looks like a massacre at that point.
Yeah, well, no. It was almost at the point where it was like too dangerous because you shoot over your limit. That's a federal offense, my friend, not a state
Right.
offense. And we're like, I don't think I want to meet the feds today.
No, no, that's that's where guns get taken, trucks get taken, fines get
Oh,
levied. You,
yep. We
you
were
know that
just like,
audio of
you
"I'm
know
never
what?
going to financially recover from this." That's largely what's about to happen there, and you don't get to ever hunt again.
I believe what we ended up doing. Yeah, we ended up just popping up and letting them scare off, and we didn't fire a single shot because we didn't even want to educate them.
Right.
And it's so stupid of us because we spend all of our time because these birds get so pressured and they see so many flocks of decoys and stuff. It was the last day of season. Who do we
Hmm.
care if we educate them? They're on to the next bunch of suckers down the road.
Right. You could have at least, how many ever there were of you, two
We
apiece.
could have popped our limit. It was two
Yeah.
apiece at that point, and we could have popped our limit, no problem. But no, we're a bunch of smart 18-year-olds.
Right. Well, I mean, when you got that many there, there's a chance that you shoot one, but you catch one behind it, and then you shoot another one, you catch one behind it, and then you just pray one of your buddies is a terrible shot, and you're like, so if we run the numbers, everyone hit their limit, regardless of who shot.
Yeah, it was one of those. You know what? Just just let them
You
go.
know
I
that
enjoyed
that's
it.
an example of advanced maturity that doesn't normally exist with kids.
Yeah, trust me, that was the only time that ever existed for me. We're not going to look at the rest of my teenage years. Sweep that
Well,
under the rug real quick.
yeah, we'll not talk about anything that might be still within the statute of limitations,
Yeah.
considering
That's right.
you only turned 21 in 2015. So um,
I mean, hey, I turned 29 in January if it makes you feel better.
no, no, it doesn't. Not even remotely. No, why? I'm not even 30 yet. Is what I just heard you say. Like that's the words that I heard you say. I'm not 30 yet.
Hey, Carson's not even 26 yet.
I assumed as much because usually the age gap is somewhere between 3 and 5 years between a guy and a girl. That's just like an a normal average. And I read this study that holds it to be true is that um, at birth a infant male is I think 3 or 4 weeks behind an infant female. And so if you run the numbers out, if we look at maturation, that's the reason why they show more advanced maturity. Maturation is whiskey. We're talking about maturity. More advanced maturity at younger ages is because they start off with a head start. And so you usually end up, like trying to marry somebody the same age as you. They're like, you're sort of stupid and I don't like you. And they're right. They're
Oh yeah,
mostly right.
you. I will just simply say this: we as men don't just take things for fact ever. We must
Mhm.
prove it ourselves. And my father made me earn knowledge. It was never given. Oh, is that piece of metal hot? You're going to find out by touching it. Oh, is that flammable? You're going to find out by almost setting yourself on fire.
that there are certain lessons that can only be learned one way, and that's it's a thing that I learned in which I mean it's common sense, but whenever I was doing just playing around with the idea of blacksmithing, you get into this mindset that if it's red, it's hot. Nope, nope. Sometimes when it's black, it's still hot because it
Black
doesn't get
heat,
red until a
worst
certain
heat.
temperature. And so you get used to like, don't touch that one. It's red. You reach over and grab this one with your hand, and you're like, oh, now it's stuck to me
Yep,
because it's still hot,
yep.
right? So
Black
give it the
heat,
light touch,
the
light
most
touch, light touch.
dangerous heat in his forge.
Oh, yeah. And I learned that, and I didn't have like no fingerprint here, nothing on this, nothing on this, nothing on this, and then the pinky which wrapped around was like because I grabbed a hold and held before I realized what I had done, and when I let
You
go,
were
it
ready
was
to go
still
commit a really good crime.
it was No, because I couldn't grab anything. Like I was like holding something was painful at that point. Not doing that.
Oh
It was
yeah,
a terrible
dude.
mistake.
With that welding background, let me tell you, the
Mhm.
amount of times I've grabbed something hot
Yep.
and just had to shout a line of obscenities afterwards.
You know, and the thing is, when I was in college, I lived with 3 girls. We were all friends. None of us were, we weren't in any. They were just friends, and it was an inexpensive house. It was like a 5-bedroom house that we were renting for less than $100 per month per person. Right? That's how shitty this house was. No, look, it was not safe. But
That's
they
what made
had
it fun.
right, but they had curling irons and flat irons and all of that. And I learned real quick that when you knock something off of the sink, don't grab it, right? Because as a guy, you do. It's because it's usually it's a toothbrush, it's deodorant, it's toothpaste, it's don't because that curling iron might still be hot and you grab the wrong end, even though it's not red hot. Right? You don't know.
Yep.
But
Oh,
then, 10
the
years down the
amount of
road,
times
John's forgotten.
I see Carson drop hers, and I'm just like, uh-uh,
You back
uh-uh.
back up. Hmm.
No, I don't trust it. I look
Mm-mm.
at that thing like a snake. It's gonna reach out and bite me.
It, and it will. And you're learning your lesson early enough. So you're into whiskey. You have a pretty good collection. Um, what's your daily go to? Like, what's your thing that you're like? All right, I don't mind drinking this on a regular basis.
Probably Russell's tenure.
I knew it had to be a turkey product.
Me addicted to turkey?
What
Never.
like how did this addiction to turkey start? Right. So let me back up.
Okay,
Let's give it some context. Um, you have a relatively significant collection of Master's Keep. Is that a correct statement?
I have every Master's Keep that has been released, with the exception of Unforgotten, which I just haven't gotten yet this year. So I
So
have all 7 releases. I've also gotten some very limited bottlings from years
mhm.
ago and been fortunate enough to get some export only releases.
So how does a kid from Illinois get addicted to premium wild turkey products?
So funny enough, when I started down the bourbon hole, I actually did not like wild turkey.
Hold on, I gotta back up right now. Okay, so Bourbon Hole may be the new name of my podcast because it just feels inappropriate, but also appropriate.
It's just inappropriate enough to make you giggle.
Would you like to join me in the Bourbon Hole? Right? That does that.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for helping me rebrand. This
I like
is
this.
inappropriate. All right. So when you started into the Bourbon Hole,
Yeah, so my first bottle that I really liked, and if you can't tell, if you want me to rewind to one point, I'm going to rewind about 50 steps past
as
that
far
so we can get there. So, first bottle that I really liked was actually Evan Williams Single Barrel. And at the time, it was still available in Illinois, and it was 28 or 29 bucks a bottle for a 8 to 9 year old single barrel product. Pretty darn tasty to me. Um, but yeah, I had tried Russell's at one point and I thought it had too much spice, but that's when I was like 6 to 8 months into whiskey drinking.
mhm.
Fast forward a few years, and I realized that I had liked Russell's Reserve single barrel picks, and I had one, maybe two of those at this point. But I'm laying in bed with, I'm laying in a hotel actually in Springfield, Illinois one night. I was down there visiting friends. And I get a call from my buddy back home who usually went on every trip with me to go hunt down bottles or go to make a Benny's run. Because
Mhm.
every Benny's store from us was 45 minutes.
Yep.
And so we would be like, all right, it's Saturday. We're 22. We have nothing to do in this world. Yeah,
Yep.
let's go hit up 4 different Benny's today. Who cares? He called me at like 11 o'clock at night, and I'm half asleep. And I pick it up. Yeah. Hey, they have a Wild Turkey Masters Keep 17 year here. $150. You want it? I mean, I don't need it, but sure. What the hell? Click. Well, 2 days later, I'm having dinner with him. I get the bottle. He comes on over, and we crack it open. And our eyes went like saucers when we tried this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We had never really experienced what Wild Turkey could do. And by the end of the following week, we had tracked down the decades and the revival. And oh yeah, dude, this was like it was like a heroin addiction. Like, here, you got your
When
first
you
hit.
go in, you go in. I understand.
I
When
got
you
my
go
first
into
hit,
the
and then
bourbon
all of a
hole,
sudden it
you
was
have
just
to
like,
be.
I need more Master's Keep, please. I
Yep.
ain't gonna make it without it. And believe it or not, I've gone through. I'm on my second bottle of Decades. I'm on my second bottle of Revival with a third hiding up in the closet. I'm on my second bottle of Cornerstone Rye. Like, I have bought them multiple times, but the
Mm-hmm.
store that we went to find a lot of this stuff also happened to have the release that came out before Master's Keep, which was called Diamond Anniversary, and it
Mm-hmm.
was to celebrate Jimmy's 60 years with the company. That was a blend of 13 and 16-year-old whiskeys. I had that in my possession. Um, I have ended up with more premium whiskey from Wild Turkey than I know what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
And what really drives me to enjoy them so much is the fact that this company has only two mash bills, one
Mm-hmm.
bourbon and one rye. And when you taste through all the different bourbons, to find the amount of difference and complexity that they can create is just unreal. And that's a testament to the fact that they have three different aging sites. The one being Tyrone, which is right there in Lawrenceburg at all the distillery facilities. The other being McBriar, which is actually right across the street from Four Roses in Lawrenceburg.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one being like an hour south at Camp Nelson.
I don't think anybody knows about Camp Nelson at all.
Yeah, no, nobody's ever heard of that. It's a great kept secret.
So you got infatuated with that with the turkey. How did you like what pushed you into everything else, right? Like because I feel like your collection is pretty broad, right? You've
Yeah,
got a
my
very strong turkey vein, but
I've got a strong turkey vein, but really, like, my love for everything else really came from watching reviews. So, the likes of Perry with This Is My Bourbon podcast,
Mhm,
Chad and Sarah on its Bourbon Night, back in the early days of Bourbon Junkies,
mhm,
and like, my whole education in whiskey really formally started with the Whiskey Vault YouTube channel,
yep.
and that's where I really learned a lot of my stuff. And then, like I said, Google and YouTube, man, I can go down a rabbit hole real fast.
Yeah, and that's both the benefit and detriment of most of my spare time. Is that now I can, but also like, should I be doing something else?
Yeah.
Probably, maybe, but everybody's fed, everybody's clothed, we have food. We're good to go. Um, have you gotten into other spirits? Like, are you diving into Scotch? Or are you just staying in the bourbon and rye vein?
So I do like my bourbon and rye, but actually I do find myself jumping back. And when I'm turning like this, I'm looking over at my shelf to
Yep.
kind of check and see what else is there. Um, I do find myself going back into Irish whiskey a bit. And
Hmm.
actually, I truly, my first bottles of whiskey I purchased were Scotch. And I still have a soft spot for non-peated scotches, especially um, Compass Box, the what is it? The Great King Street blend or whatever it
Hmm.
is. It's like a 30 to good Lord. I'm gonna have to Google this now because I done forgot. I done goofed. If my mouse, there we go. Bluetooth, nice. Not the best thing.
So are we on the mechanical keyboard right now?
Yes, actually, yeah, I went with a tactile one.
Hmm.
There, hey, there's another thing I got into that I didn't need to be into.
I don't know anything about that. I have nothing to say about mechanical keyboards.
All right, there it is. It's the Artist Blend from Compass Box. That is one that will always have a soft spot, along with, honestly, a bottle, in my opinion, doesn't get enough attention. Have you ever heard of Auchentoshan?
Yeah, yeah,
They're American oak. It is like a $35 bottle of single malt scotch from the lowlands, and it is so darn good.
yeah. We've got a whiskey bar that opened up in a town near me a handful of years ago, and they've got an incredible selection. And they've got some pretty good Auchentoshan, some older, dustier bottles. You know, being in Kentucky, we have that opportunity now where you can buy vintage whiskeys in a store setting. And so they have some. And one of my wife's really good friends, her husband is into Scotch, and so we'll regularly go back. We'll go up to the whiskey bar, and I'll pick out a bourbon for him, and he'll pick out a Scotch for me, because we're
Yep,
educating each other, because he doesn't know much about bourbon, and I know far less about Scotch than he knows about bourbon.
I've got a bottle of scotch at home that is, and when I say home, I mean back in Illinois. I still don't have the entirety of the collection in Indiana yet. This is bad.
No, it helps you to feel better about it, right? Because once you get it all in one place, then you're like, well, shit, now I have to face my addiction completely.
Sir, it's an addiction if you call it that. If I call it a coping mechanism, that's different.
You know, I'm pretty sure heroin can still be a coping mechanism, and it's both. It's still
I don't need your logic here. I need you to support me in my bullshit.
I support it. I support it in conversations that are not just the two of us talking. Like if we have, like, if my wife shows up, we'll have that. Yeah, this is it's fine. It's fine. No,
Fair
she
enough.
understands.
Yeah, no. Benny's had on sale Highland Park Full Volume back in the
Hmm.
day, which was an 18-year-old Scotch aged exclusively in ex bourbon barrels. They were selling it for $50 a bottle. Yes, you heard me right.
Okay, but
18-year-old Highland Park for $50. Would you have bought that?
you know, and here's the detriment to being a bourbon person going into Scotch is that I assume everything is cheap, because in bourbon the bottom end for me usually is $10 per year. Your assumption is $10 per year, right? It's a fair number, and it's going to vary from distillery to distillery. But if you've got a 12-year-old whiskey, $120 is not inappropriate for it. So if you tell me you have a 15-year scotch for $50, I'm like, damn, that's a deal. But it's not the same thing. And so I don't know. But yes, I would be like, that feels like a deal. Let's buy that.
So, for context, original shelf price at Benny's was 100, and they
Yeah.
were clearing it out at 50.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, I'll buy it. I bought 3 bottles. I wasn't even sure what it tasted like, but I knew it was an 18-year-old Scotch for $50.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
It feels
smart,
like
but I ain't dumb.
like $100 should be a right. You know, like that's exactly where it should be. Um, and it would still feel like a deal to me because I have a broken bourbon brain. I'm stuck in the
Exactly.
bourbon hole.
The bourbon hole, man, it's a dangerous place.
It's a thing. You know,
It's a thing now. It's
all right, cigars. Let's talk about cigars. That's another
stogies.
passion of
Oh,
yours, right?
maybe a smidge.
Just a smidge. So what's what's the entry to cigars? Like did you just go out and buy a cigar one day, you know, or is there like a familial attraction, or like, how do you get to cigars?
So the entry for two cigars was I mean, it was always kind of one of those things that just went hand in hand with whiskey.
Yep.
And so, originally, like everything else, I started on YouTube and I looked up some stuff. Believe the first three cigars I bought were from Drew Estate. They were part of the Undercrown line.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought those three because it let me see three different wrapper leaf characteristics. Because
Mm-hmm.
they had a Connecticut shade, which is very light, very creamy. They had a Sumatra sun-grown, which is very spicy and peppery. And then they had a Maduro, which is very dark chocolate and rich. And so I was able to kind of find my palate in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely favor the dark chocolate and rich stuff.
I was gonna guess that if
Uh,
you listed them in light, spicy, dark, but if you listed them in preference order, it would be dark, spicy, light.
yep.
And that's just coming from a whiskey palate as well, right? Because
Oh
you,
yeah.
you,
For me in whiskey, there's nothing I love more than dark fruit and leather and
mm-hmm.
like old dark chocolate, especially if I can find it.
Yep.
Oh, makes the fat boy in me so happy.
Well, see, dark chocolate's healthy because it has antioxidants, man. So it's not a fat. That is a skinny person treat, and it's okay for us to like that. Like this is you don't do that to you. I had the detriment of growing up in a time where the internet existed, but if you were trying to like do research on cigars or whiskey, it wasn't really a
Oh, it
thing.
was yeah.
And so it was like, yeah, look, you don't have to be so like, oh yeah, of course, that was so long ago. Fuck you, man.
I'm just saying, I know the cesspool that was the internet back then.
Right. So trying to like figure out cigars, it was just it was a crapshoot, man. Like you didn't know what you could find. There were subscription services. Do you know what Columbia House is? You may be too young to know what Columbia House is.
I actually do know what Columbia House is.
So there were cigar subscription services that were following the Columbia House model there for a while, and in the
Really?
same vein, they sucked about as bad as Columbia House did. And so I didn't get like a great education. I get super envious of folks like you that are able to grow up with like this access to like really reasonable information to know the difference between, a Connecticut, a Sumatra, and a Maduro that early on. Like right off the rip, you're like, oh, here's a good brand, Drew Estate. Anybody who knows cigars knows who Drew Estate is. And here's, 3 flavors, and I can go try these and I can figure out what I hate you kids. You damn kids these days. This is obnoxious. You didn't have to
Oh,
suffer through smoking terrible things that sort of tasted stale and awful, like
yes,
we
I
did.
did. Yes, I did. All right, 16-year-old Eric, who was underage smoking, definitely smoked some Black and Milds and some Backwoods.
There is nothing wrong with Jerry's Backwoods cigars. Don't listen. They have a life and they have a time when they are appropriate. And Black and Milds are the same way, but to a lesser extent. There is a time, there's a time when Virginia Slim has a life, like you've been out at a lake and you cannot make it back to anywhere reasonable, and that's all someone has. That's what you'd go with that night, right? Like that's just what happens.
I mean, you
So
can do that, but man, you really hate yourself.
the next day you absolutely do. But if you're at the point where you can't like so we have a lake that is, maybe 30, 45 minutes that way. And getting back into town is not an option at certain points in your collegiate career whenever you've been at the lake all day long and you're staying at the lake for that night. Getting back to town is not an option. So you deal with what you've got. You've ran out of sandwich meat. You got bread and chips. So you're having chip sandwiches. And somebody, all they have is Virginia Slims. That's what you smoke for the night. Whatever's left at, 11 or 12 o'clock at night, it's what you drink. It just is what it is. This is how life
Oh,
goes. So it has its place. And Black and Mild is somewhere before Virginia Slim and after, Backwoods
after a
cigars.
Backwoods.
Hmm?
I said definitely after a Backwoods,
Yeah, yeah.
or Virginia Slim.
Yeah, yeah. But
But
they have
yeah,
different.
so I started getting into those, and honestly, I found one brand that I basically stuck with all the time, and that was Arturo Fuente's Hemingway line.
Mm-hmm.
and I found that I really liked it for they have an earthy tone to them because they use a African Cameroon wrapper that I just found I really freaking liked.
Yep. And
Well,
I think
fast
I think I
forward,
went to Hemingway's over here because if you have a bunch of whiskey, you also obviously have to have cigars, even if you don't get a chance to smoke them that often.
yep.
It's the thing. It's the quintessential white guy move. Like this is what we're supposed to do.
Look, once you turn 26, you make your life about a few different things. Mine is smoking meat and whiskey and cigars.
I knew smoking meat was in there. I knew because that's the T-shirt. It's like you get really into something. It's like history or smoking meat. Are you into history or smoking meat? And the thing is, with whiskey, it's history and drinking. So you can do
Yeah,
both, right? Like that's what makes it even better is that we can be history/drinking nerds. Um,
exactly.
so you stick pretty heavy with Arturo Fuente Hemingway. So
Well,
that's
I
what you
used
said.
to.
But you don't anymore.
I do not.
So what are we?
Um,
What should we be smoking?
I smoke a lot of Aladino cigars now, which is from the Iroa family. And the Iroa family is the company and brand and family that originally started Camacho back in the day
Okay.
before they were sold off to Davidoff. Well, after their 6 year non compete was up, they still had all their farms, they still had all their genetics.
Mm-hmm.
They went right back to work under the Aladino brand. And now they put out some of the best Honduran made cigars I've ever had. They're also a lot more affordable than my Fuentes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a big one because when the cigar budget starts to eat into the whiskey budget, I have an issue.
You have to make decisions.
I don't like making those decisions.
Right.
You're asking me to pick my favorite child.
Listen, I have two children, and it depends on the day which one's your favorite. This is how it works, right? You don't have a lifetime favorite, you just have a daily favorite because one just is hitting the right moves. And there are days where both of them, like, so you do have a hard time. There's days like both of them are just like hitting their groove, and you're like, yeah, good kids. My wife's doing a good job of raising them because this behavior is not because of me. And I acknowledge that. But then you have days where you know where their favorites are, and you're like, this kid's not having a good day, and that behavior is because of me, and I know this.
Yes,
Like,
you're
this
like,
is my fault.
you're looking at it like you're acting a bit too much like me, and there's only room for one me in this family. So get it together.
Correct. Correct. Like, listen, your mom is gonna lose it because she only agreed to marry one of me, and I'm gonna need you to be a little more like her, because
You're young. You can change. I'm set in my ways.
right, I'm broken forever. Listen, I grew up. I'm the back end of Generation X, and we watched everything that you could possibly ever watch happen live on TV. And there's just a bunch of like it started off with watching Ronald Reagan get shot, and then there's the Challenger explosion. Like we just saw so many things live on TV that nobody should see. So we're broken. We're just permanently
Oh yeah.
broken. It is what it is. So where am I getting these Aladino cigars? Like, where do I need to go buy some? Because I obviously need to
So
put some more in my humidor.
well, I will send courier to you with some happily.
Uh-huh.
But right now, they really do not sell online. They only sell in brick and mortar.
Gotcha. And,
Um,
and what am I drinking with it? Like you have a pairing, right?
whatever bourbon you want that night.
Anything? So because here's what I run into regularly is that because you have these three profiles. You go to your Connecticut, your Sumatra, your Maduro, dark, spicy, light, right? Trying to put a light cigar up against a heavy bourbon doesn't go well, right? Like one gets just demolished. And if you have
Yeah,
a light bourbon and a super dark cigar, you may not get much of it. So like you've got this like perfect vein of flavor
it's
profile. But are
just
we saying that
clashing. So
Aladino works with everything?
I would say that I think it all depends on what you want
Hmm.
that night. Do you want to taste more of your cigar, or do you want to taste more of your whiskey, or do you want them to live harmoniously?
Hmm.
So for me, they do a Cameroon. So
Hmm.
I've got their line pulled up. So Aladino has a Corojo, a Connecticut, a Maduro, a Habano, and a Cameroon.
Hmm.
And all of those are going to be different. For me, I lend towards the Cameroon. Why? Because it is full flavored, but the flavor itself is mild and it is more in line with earth and like white pepper, if there is
Okay.
spice. It is very complementary to the sweet and heavy notes that you can find in whiskeys, in my opinion. Now, I am not a tobacconist. I am not a sommelier. I
Hmm.
am a hillbilly with a big, glorious red beard and a stupid cowboy hat. That is it.
I don't think you can call yourself a hillbilly because I'm not sure that Illinois is known for its hilly terrain.
Damn it. You're not wrong. Where I am from, this is, John, I'm not even kidding you when I say this. When Carson and I moved down here, and
Hmm.
to those in YouTube land, Carson is my girlfriend. And yeah, so going back to the story, where I'm from in Illinois, it is a flat grid for the
Hmm.
entirety of the county, basically. Everything is
You
on
can see
square
your dog
miles.
away for days. Like if your
Yes,
dog
I
runs
can.
away, you just see them. Keep going.
All right, fine. I am a redneck.
That's fair because I'm from Western Kentucky. We are rednecks here as well. We can't be hillbillies because there's no hills, right? You get into
I
Middle Tennessee, Eastern Kentucky, you get some hillbillies, and there's a certain portion of southeastern Illinois where you get
yes,
into where there's some hills there,
the Shawnee.
but that's not where you are though, because I
No,
understand the geography of Illinois.
although where I am at now, I can be
Yep.
classified as a hillbilly.
But you haven't been there long enough to get the credentials. That's like showing up in New York City. Like I just rented my apartment and I sit down in
I
my apartment and I'm like, I am a New York Cityan or whatever they
That's
call
you know
themselves.
what? And David Levine's going to appreciate this. Carlin had a bit on this once.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I was born in New York, at New York Hospital, in New York City, in New York County, New York. That is city, county, and state. And if
Right.
you want to really get technical, I was conceived at Rockaway Beach.
Exactly. Exactly.
He
But
said, that is my New York credentials.
there's a time where you switch over, and because I have this conversation regularly with my wife, because she's from Tennessee, right?
Okay.
But we have hit the time frame where she has now lived in Kentucky longer than Tennessee. So is she a Tennessean who lives in Kentucky, or is she a person who was born in Tennessee that is now a Kentuckian?
She's a
And I tend to
Kentuckian.
lean towards the latter, but people's attachment to their roots can be very strong. And so she's like, I'm both. And I don't argue because she's smarter than me.
I'm an Illiana Hoosier, as far as I'm concerned.
Ileana. So because we have the Kentuckiana. Like Kentuckiana is a term that exists and I hate it more than anything because like one or the other. But anyways, I appreciate the Ileana because it's a
Well, the
lot
thing
better
is,
than
especially where
ingenuity.
I'm from, there are a lot of people that live in Indiana that work in Illinois, and vice
Right.
versa, live in Illinois and work in Indiana. So
Yeah.
Illiana is actually the name of some businesses up there.
Yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
no, I'm an Illiana Hoosier now.
Do you feel like you're betraying your roots by being attached to Indiana?
Not at all, really. Um, I still have businesses, or I still have accounts with stuff in Illinois, I should say,
Hmm.
and I still have my attachment to the state. All my family's there.
Are you
I
going
just
back?
live somewhere
Like, are
else.
you eventually going back to Illinois, or you just wherever the career takes you is where you go?
Wherever the wind, wherever Cummins, let's rephrase that. Wherever
Yes.
Cummins says I need to go, we'll go. So
I'm
long
glad
as
you
they keep
rebranded
providing.
specifically to who employs you now. Like, it's a very firm, like on social media. I'm not looking anywhere else. Cummins, where you tell me to
Uh,
go, I go.
exactly. Well, and I got to be completely honest. I've never been treated so well
Hmm.
from a corporation in my life that you're gonna be hard pressed to steal me away from them.
Everybody's got a price, And if cat shows up and Caterpillar's like, hey, we'll give you double.
If that's the case, I'm only taking it if they offer me a position in Texas.
You want to go? You trying to have the hat match the location? Is that where we're going?
There you have it.
What part of Texas? Southern Texas, Northern Texas, Western Texas, East Texas? You don't know? You don't care?
Don't know, don't care.
Have you been to Texas before?
Yes.
What part of Texas you go to?
I've been to Dallas, Fort Worth. I've been to San Antonio. I've been to Houston, and I've been to Paris, Texas, which is about as far north as you can get.
Yeah, so you've hit the two kind of veins because I've, at least in my experience, I have my mom's family. Half of them were born in San Antonio, and half of them were born in Kentucky. Okay. And it's not like they split at a time frame. It's like every other kid. She's got like 7 siblings. They followed the work at that point in time. You got to think, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you followed work, you went where it was. And so in the wintertime, you're working in Texas. In the summertime, you're working in Kentucky because you're trying not to die in Texas, whatever. But there is San Antonio, Texas, and there's Dallas, Texas. And everything else that you visit is some blend of those two, right? Houston, Austin, which Austin is a little bit different, but different parts of Texas feel different. But yes. Dallas and San Antonio do not feel the same at all.
Well, and West Texas is a whole different country.
That's just other Arizona. West Texas is just other Arizona.
I got some friends who are ranchers who are going to love it when I tell them that.
Yeah, but I mean, look, because this is, part of my job. Like, and it's fine. Like they wouldn't take objection to it either. They're like, okay, yeah, cool. Like, yeah, we're other Arizona. That's fine.
It is though. It's just desert, cactus, cow.
Yeah.
Desert, cactus, cow. Do that for about 14 hours, and that's
here's the other thing that I've wondered regularly. You've lived in Illinois. You currently live in Indiana, and you have significant deer populations, right? This is just a thing. Like the idea, you or someone in your family has hit at least one deer with a vehicle, if not many.
Mm-hmm.
This is a regular occurrence. In Texas, on the side of their interstates and highways, they usually have like a 7-foot tall chain link fence to try to keep deer out of the road. Why is no other state doing this shit?
I don't know.
Like, I've never been like, Texas is a deer state. Like, they have deer, right? But like, that's not
the only thing I can think is there are a lot of ranches that you can hunt in Texas, and they will do whatever they have to protect their, for lack of a better term, genetic freaks.
Yeah, no, I understand what but these are like state right of way fences. These aren't farmers that are doing it. There are state right of way fences that are just lying, because we drove from San Antonio to Dallas and back again, and there was fences the entire way, just trying to keep animals out of the highway. Like, everyone should be doing this. Why? And this was in the early 90s, when hunting culture is what it is now.
I mean, that sounds amazing to me. Are you telling me I can finally just go full tilt like a Peterbilt at 10 o'clock at night and not worry about a suicidal deer?
Well, you still have the speed limit problem, right? Like, that's still
the speed limit. I can do. Hey. We're not worried about the speed limit. We can deal with the cherries and the berries and paying a fine. What I don't want to deal with is breaking the whole darn car.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Because in the states where they don't have speed limits, they're not doing this either. And maybe that's the thing. They're like, we'll keep people honest by letting animals potentially run out in front of them, whatever. Maybe they
have weaponized suicidal animals.
This is what it is. It is a speed control concept. They want to have, like, in your brain, you could hit an animal, so don't go that fast.
But then there's the Autobahn in Europe. And you want to know what they do?
Whatever they want.
They do whatever they want, but they build bridges so that the animals know where they cross the road. I want nothing more than to drive on the Autobahn and just takes some stupid car that I can never really afford and just goes fast as humanly possible for a little bit.
That's that if I were to receive a terminal diagnosis, I'm renting a car that I should never have access to, and it's going to be one fun ride because the
Yes.
consequences are not very large at that point. You just kind of do
No.
whatever you do.
No, that or I'm paying the astronomical prices and I am taking some Porsche or some GTR out on
Mhm.
the Nürburgring and just I'm either going to make it around the Nordschleife or I'm going to die. Either way, I'm going to be happy.
A smile on my face, and likely I'm going to pay the security deposit because there's a good chance that there's going to be a cigar in my hand that they don't want me smoking in this vehicle. It's just a
Yes.
guarantee. And
Oh,
whatever's in my cup is what's in my cup. We'll just let that be what it is.
hey, they can't tell when it's inside of a metal tumbler. Don't worry about if
Yes,
it's
they
a.
can. They can open up and smell it, Eric. Here we go.
That's none of their
Watch this.
business. That's an invasion of my privacy.
We're talking
Don't
about Europe,
worry
and you're
about
in
why I
America, and
have
they
a
don't.
30-ounce old fashioned in here. That's none of your business.
You don't understand. You're American, and this is Europe. They don't give a shit about your privacy, Eric. This is not a
I
concern
know.
for them, not even in the slightest.
Oh, I know. But
All
hey,
right.
we're living in a dream world. Let me dream.
Absolutely, yeah. We're living. There's something that's happening here that occurred. This so we've got Aladino Cigar, we've got Wild Turkey, we've got collegiate natural champion of archery. I don't know that I don't have anything else to ask, and we're right at 2 hours. So we're going to talk for at least 4 more minutes to make sure we cross that 2 hour time frame. Like you hit you hit the sweet spot for me is right at 2 hours. Is there something we didn't
Absolutely.
talk about that we should talk about? You got something?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll give background on how the bourbon cowboy ever became a thing and why
Yeah,
this
let
always
the cowboy
happens.
hat is specific. So, I mean, I'm gonna stop you for a second, then I'll let you talk. I was talking to Aaron from Smoke Wagon a couple weeks, maybe a month and a half ago, and I was asking him about his cowboy hat. I was like, because I have a big head. Like I have a big head. You're familiar with the concept. Like baseball hats are not an option. I was like, what puts you in a position? Because he didn't grow up wearing cowboy hats. It wasn't a thing for him. I was like, where did you finally get it? And he was like, I just decided I want to, so I did. Like life's too short to worry about whether you should or should not. So we talked about that at length. So you got into cowboy hats as a farm kid from Illinois, which can work. Can work.
Nope,
You are
never wore them
missing the
on the
giant
farm.
ass. You're missing the giant ass belt buckle, right? But you can make that jump. So where did you get to the bourbon cowboy?
So the bourbon cowboy actually comes, and I will send you the picture if you want me to. You can put it in here. I
Absolutely.
was I was leaving an event for Indiana Bourbon Club when I moved down here, and I had gone there. It was a big bottle share. Everybody was finally getting to meet me for the first time. Now, for
Hmm.
me, I've always thrown on the cowboy hat when I need to look a bit more formal and or nicer. But also, in my lifetime, every time I see somebody with a cowboy hat, I know I want to go talk to that person. And I'm a
Hmm.
talkative person, so I'm like, there's a lot of people that just want to talk to somebody in a cowboy hat. I'm going to rock a cowboy hat when I go to
Hmm.
bourbon events. And it's just kind of stuck. And there's a picture of me walking out like Bender from Breakfast Club. I am walking away, hands in the air. There's a bottle in each hand, and
Hmm.
there's bottles shoved in the back pockets of my jeans.
And that's how the bourbon cowboy exits an event.
Pretty much. And
Very true.
that's how I got given the nickname Bourbon Cowboy. I always
Hmm.
played around with it, but
Right.
until other people called me it, I did not create that Instagram handle.
Yeah, it's weird to give yourself a nickname. I had a friend that used to always talk about that. But like giving yourself like if you walk up to a group of people, like my name's John, but people call me Rooster. Like that doesn't ever connect. Like it has to be
Nope.
slightly more organic for you to at least try to own it. Like trying to nickname yourself is a weird weird idea, but
You can't
it
get
fits. Like it's an appropriate and there's like it's weird to have like this Illinois Viking cowboy because that's effectively
yeah,
what it is at this point, right? Like the
it's
the
what
the
it
the
is.
the,
But
the
what
red beard,
makes it even more fun is it doesn't show up great, but I have blonde hair, but I
Uh-huh.
have a bright red beard.
Yeah. There's the red beard, there's the cowboy hat, there's the country sensibility, but also Illinois. Like
Yep.
that doesn't fit. And like you show up in Kentucky, you're like, all of these things are confusing to me. They don't make sense.
Yeah. So, and the other thing is, it also goes with the fact that um, I'd want to go out on like a date night with Carson,
Mhm.
and I didn't always want to wear a hat. I always wear a hat everywhere I go, and I
Mhm.
mean, you can see here, I've done nothing but sit here,
Yeah.
and I'm sweating. Like, why? So, um,
It's glistening.
for
You're
me,
glistening. You're not sweating, you're glistening.
a cowboy hat always looked better dressed up than a baseball cap ever
Mhm.
can.
Right.
And so I just started rocking the cowboy hat. And when I first moved down here last August, Carson and I took a trip to Louisville. I got, I mean, I made a whole bunch of new friends in a bar one night by wearing the cowboy hat. Much to Carson's chagrin, she's like, "Oh, good God, do you have to make friends everywhere you go?"
Yeah,
I'm like,
she's just
"Yes,
trying to have some time with you, and now you have new friends.
yes, that's exactly what it is everywhere you go." But
I feel like whether the hat was there or not, that might still occur, Eric. Like you have that kind of a personality that fits it, and I can sum it up in this exact moment. We both physically met in person at Perry from This Is My Bourbon Podcast Bourbon Weekend back in Memorial Day, and Perry made a choice that not many podcasters would make. Is we sat down on Friday night and he set up a microphone. It's him and it's Eric and they're running their regular show and they set a microphone in front of them and they're like, "Does anyone just want to sit down and chat?" Right, opening up to a room full of sarcastic and mildly drunk assholes. Right?
yes,
It's a bold move. It's a really bold move, and I appreciate
uh,
like Perry's the guy. He's the one that would do something because he's got this like connection with human beings and like believes in the like he's just a good guy and he's like, "Yeah,
oh
let's have
yeah,
this conversation." And the first person is you without a doubt. And that is why I think whether the cowboy hat was there or not, you're going to make friends with people in a bar. There are people that do that just inherently in who they are.
it is. But I tell you what, in the days post COVID, where not everybody is as willing to take on a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
this is the greatest conversation starter that exists. And I'm here to tell you, John, if you get me a measurement of your head, I will get you a cowboy hat.
Here's the thing is this is what I want and it doesn't exist in the world is that you're exactly right. Like a cowboy hat is obviously far more suitable than a baseball cap in a lot of situations. But there's not any other hat that is accepted in society today that doesn't make you look like an asshole that isn't a cowboy hat, right? Like cowboy hat just doesn't necessarily fit my identity. And I'm fine with that. Like it doesn't bother me, but what other hat is there? There's not an option. The rest of you sort of look like a douchebag. There's just not an option, right? And I I'm not the trendsetter who's like, all right, I'm gonna adopt this, and now we're gonna make this not a thing. I'll continue
We
to
need,
just
you know what?
display my
You need to
baldness to
bring
the world.
back the flat cap.
But it's such it just seems like a lot of work, and I just don't have it. It's like I'm like, that sounds like a lot of work. I'll just put some turtle wax on, give it good shine, and we'll be good to go at that point. No concerns.
Right, you're only using turtle wax. I got some better products. We can really make that shine like a bowling ball, man. We can make that thing glisten.
Well, I've been trying to get to one of those, the food additive from Christmas Vacation, that he
Yep.
makes and he puts on the disc. Like if I could get a hold of some of that, we'll do that route. But turtle wax gives it a nice sheen without being too reflective. Like it makes it look
And you
like your
know what?
skin's in
Turtle
healthy.
wax has a nice scent. I will admit.
Yeah, it does. It does. And it's weird now, if we walk through the automotive section of a store, my wife's like, So I love that smell. I don't know. It's just, it's conditioned behavior. It's a conditioned behavior
That's a,
point.
hey man, that is Pavlov's dog. Ring the bell, they start to
Absolutely.
salivate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I don't have anything else if you don't have anything else.
No, I really don't. This has been an awesome conversation. I hope we can
Yeah.
do it again, man.
Yeah, we'll be back again at some point talking about some blue popcorn or some sweet corn or some other distillery or just because I'm thoroughly thank you for showing up tonight, giving me a couple hours of your Sunday afternoon.
Oh
We'll try to
man,
make
the
sure we
pleasure is
understand.
all mine. Anybody that is silly enough to give me a microphone and a platform, I'm happy to show up.
Obviously, you haven't dug through. Like anybody who wants a platform can come and chat with me. Like we'll find an interesting thing to come to talk about because we've talked about geese hunting, we've talked about whiskey, we've talked about cigars, we've talked about agriculture, we've talked about cat. This is what is valuable to me, right? Everybody
Yeah.
focuses on let's talk about whiskey, and we spent maybe 25% of this conversation talking about whiskey, and the rest of it is just talking about people, and that's what's
You know
interesting.
what? What I did need to ask, did you ever get your hands on any Whiskey Acres products?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I've been drinking the whole. Sorry. So here's
We,
we talked about whiskey acres tonight. I've been drinking this since we started the episode. I pre-tuned with something else, but I've been drinking this the entire time, and it's really good. Like the thing that I will say, so kind of rolling back the time a little bit, is that this is a 2015 Harvest bottle. I think
yep,
I
that's
got
what
it
I have.
from Seal Box. Um, there's a distinct note that comes with craft whiskey, and it's either because it's
Right.
pot stilled, or because it's malting process or whatever. It's there, but that is a term that some people can use in kind of a negative light. This is really, really good whiskey, right?
It
And the
is.
future of whiskey in the United States and North America is going to come from craft distillers because they have an ability to innovate and do different things like blue popcorn or gem corn or sweet corn or unique craft because they're only putting out a handful of barrels at a time instead of pumping through hundreds, right? And so they
Yep.
can do some fun and unique things. They can try out stuff, and then your big distilleries will steal these ideas later on and then kind of put them into play, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so my hope is that people that like thinking of whiskey acres here as I taste them, I want to see the Lost Lanterns of the world show up and want to do single barrels with them because like Lost Lantern, I did an episode with them last week.
Yep.
They're
I
going and
listened
finding
to it.
unique barrels, right? And they're they're
Yeah.
they're partnering with craft distilleries that are doing unique and fun things, and this is
So
it.
I can actually, you and I both have a 2015 Harvest bottle. I can give you a
Mhm.
little bit more insight on this one.
Yes.
So this is a 5 year bottled in bond, and everything that has come out after the 2015 Harvest has actually been 5.5 year bottled in bond.
Nice.
And I don't hold me to this in conversations after a couple cocktails with Nick. The goal is to eventually get it to 6,
Hmm.
but
Which is
I
tough to
don't
do. I
know
mean,
if that
like
is.
like holding being a small holder and holding on to whiskey for a long time is just an opportunity to pay taxes on something that could end up not being good, right?
Yeah, and that
Because
was that was the thing that always impressed me with them was they didn't release bottled in bond until 5 years.
mhm,
They didn't even bother at 4.
till it was
They're
right.
like, this, it wasn't right, and they're like,
Yeah,
nope, not coming today.
and I can appreciate that all day long because like the cost of making whiskey is just so immense, right?
Oh God,
Because once you've created it, not even put it into barrel, once you've created it, you've begun a tax ledger where you have to continue to pay for it until
yep,
you put it in a bottle and sell it, right? And so you may be paying taxes on something that is terrible. It's gamble because it could come out of the still tasting okay. It could go into the barrel and come out tasting terrible.
yep,
Like there's whiskey that's poured out every year or blended into a massive batch. But if you're a craft distiller, you don't have a massive batch to blend it into.
no, no, and
So,
truthfully, I hope that they eventually start doing this. This is a 5.5 year. This is a 5 year old weeded bourbon.
mhm.
I would love to see what they could do with a 5 year old bourbon with rye.
Now, will they do that since they don't? I mean, because like they're seed to. Would you say
Seed to spirit.
seed to spirit? I couldn't remember the second term. Seed to spirit. If they can't grow their own rye, what are they going
They
to do
grow
here?
their own rye.
They do grow. So they do grow some rye now.
They grow all their rye that they've ever used,
Okay.
and they make rye whiskey.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't know they made rye whiskey, so that makes tons more sense.
So it's
Um,
definitely doable. It's in their portfolio.
mhm. Hmm.
Yeah, they grow everything. That's why I've always respected them, is because they went through trial and error testing of basically making a test plot
Mhm.
for a bunch of different rye hybrids and going, well, let's see which one will actually grow in Illinois.
That's it seems like a really simple thing to say, but until you've worked with or been a farmer, trying to figure out what works in a particular geography is not nearly as simple as just throw some seed in the ground, because the variability of weather, of soil conditions, of planting dates, just it may be that it just didn't do good that year, because you can plant the
Yeah,
same hybrid year over year. And you said, think of DeKalb, they can get 250 bushels per acre, but they may have a year where they only get 200, and the next year they get 275.
yeah,
Right. So in the 200 year, was that a bad year for the hybrid, or is it a bad year
for
for the weather? Or like,
exactly.
how do you know what works? And then, does it make good whiskey afterwards?
Yeah,
Like that's the next. There's so many things that go into to creating something that we're all going to
absolutely.
nitpick the shit out of after the fact.
And that was another cool thing with Dave Pickrell coming in and being a
Mhm.
consultant on this. He tested the water that they have. It is 99.99% a chemical match to the limestone water in
Nice.
Kentucky. And you want to know why? Because that limestone shelf that y'all love
It's
to
not just
talk about in
Kentucky.
Kentucky, that stuff runs all the way up to Wisconsin.
Yeah, I
And
mean, that's a thing. That's a marketing talking point. Like we're
oh
at the
yeah,
point, at
well,
least
and
for
that
us,
was
we know it is.
so well, and for me, where I grew up in Kankakee, Illinois area,
Mhm.
I grew up 3 miles from one of the biggest limestone mines or
Yeah.
limestone quarries in the state. Like, trust me, I drank ditch water if I got thirsty because it was so filtered from that quarry. I
Yeah.
didn't have to worry about it.
No, it's not a concern. I mean, like we're sitting. It's the limestone shelf that sits underneath the Ohio River, which is
Yep,
the border between Kentucky and Ohio, and Kentucky and Indiana, and Kentucky and Illinois.
I don't
And that
know.
limestone shelf extends much farther than just the edges of the river. Because if you
Yeah,
run into, Bardstown, how far are you from the river? And they're still pulling off that limestone shelf. And kind of the other side of it is that they may be using limestone water during the fermentation process, but whenever they're distilling, they're removing a ton of things. And then whenever they're proofing down, it's all reverse osmosis water at that point. It's all purified at some point. Like they're not literally using river water to proof down your whiskey and then put it in a bottle, right? And so the
absolutely
impact
not.
of limestone water exists solely during fermentation.
Yeah. That's something that they talk about. And it's something I would take pride in too, because there are a
Yeah.
lot of people in Kentucky who are like, oh, limestone water, limestone water.
And no one else is talking about it, right? Like so
Exactly.
Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, none of them are saying we do too. Well, actually, they're starting to now, right? Like so you talk to some craft distillers like, nah, we got the same stuff. Like we're the same. But because Kentucky has done a good job of creating marketing content of over something that non-GMO corn, like
There it is. Yep. Hey, buddy, we have brought this thing full circle.
circle, full circle. It works. Um, but yeah, so thank you. We're 2 hours, 13
Yeah,
minutes. Thank you so
yeah,
much for hopping on. We're gonna do this again probably in a couple months. You
absolutely.
let your life settle down. Some interesting changes coming.
No doubt.
Kudos, surprise, all of those wonderful things. I'm gonna boot you out, hit the outro, and we'll be done.
All right, buddy.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks for tuning in for this offering of the Embellish podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you have to be consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media at Twitter or Instagram using EmbellishPod, and give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, and contact details. I'll be back again next week with another new offering for you. And so until then, cheers and thanks for hanging out.